Welcome to CEO's Library, the 1% bookshelf. In our overcommunicated society, the mind is the battlefield. Are you equipped to win? Today we're diving deep into a book that revolutionized the world of marketing and advertising, Positioning, The Battle for Your Mind by Ries and Jack Trout. This groundbreaking work introduced a concept so powerful, it changed the way businesses approach marketing forever. Whether you're a seasoned marketing professional, an entrepreneur just starting out, or a business leader looking to gain an edge, this episode will equip you with the tools you need to cut through the noise and plant your product, service, or idea firmly in your customer's mind. I'm your host, and I'm excited to take you on this journey through the world of positioning. We'll explore why being first in a category is more powerful than being better, how to find openings in the prospect's mind, the dangers of line extension, and how to avoid them, secrets to naming products for maximum impact, and strategies for repositioning competitors. By the end of this episode, you'll have a new perspective on how to make your brand stand out in today's crowded marketplace. So, let's begin our exploration of Positioning, the Battle for Your Mind, and discover how you can win the battle for your customers' attention. Our world today is drowning in information. Every day we're bombarded with thousands of marketing messages, each vying for a slice of our attention. This information overload has created what Ries and Trout call an overcommunicated society. Think about it. How many ads do you see in a single day? From the moment you wake up and check your phone, to your commute filled with billboards, to the commercials on TV or streaming services, it's a constant barrage of messages. This overwhelming flood of information has a profound impact on consumers. Our brains, in an attempt to cope with this complexity, have developed defense mechanisms. We've become experts at filtering out information that doesn't immediately grab our attention or seem relevant to our needs. This means that for marketers and businesses, the challenge isn't just about creating a good product or service anymore, it's about cutting through this wall of indifference and noise to reach the consumer. Ries and Trout argue that in this overcommunicated environment, the only way to cut through is with simplified, focused messaging. They introduce the concept of positioning as a response to this challenge. Positioning isn't about creating something new and different in the market. Instead, it's about manipulating what's already in the mind, retying the connections that already exist. Think about it like this. Imagine trying to have a conversation in a crowded, noisy room. You wouldn't try to convey a complex, nuanced message. Instead, you'd boil your point down to its essence, maybe even shouting a single word or phrase to be heard. That's what effective positioning does in our overcommunicated world. The authors give us a powerful metaphor to understand how the mind copes with complexity. They describe the mind as having little ladders, or hierarchies, for different product categories. On each rung of these ladders are brand names. For instance, in the rental car category, Hertz might be on the top rung, followed by Avis, then National, and so on. The key insight here is that these ladders are relatively short. Most people can only remember a handful of brands in any given category. This means that if your brand isn't near the top of the ladder, it might not be on the ladder at all in the consumer's mind. This understanding of how the mind organizes information leads us to one of the most powerful principles in positioning: the power of being first. Ries and Trout argue that it's better to be first than it is to be better. The first brand into the mind typically gets twice the long-term market share of the number 2 brand, and twice again as much as the number 3 brand. Let's look at some examples to illustrate this principle. Think about Coca-Cola in the soft drink market. Coca-Cola wasn't the first soft drink ever invented, but it was the first to create a strong position in the mind of the consumer. As a result, it has dominated the market for over a century, despite countless competitors trying to dethrone it. Or consider Xerox in the world of copiers. For years, Xerox was synonymous with making a copy, regardless of the actual brand of machine being used. Xerox was so successful in establishing its position that it risked losing its trademark due to genericide, when a brand name becomes the generic term for a product. Kleenex is another classic example. How many times have you heard someone ask for a Kleenex when they really just meant any facial tissue? These brands were so successful in positioning themselves first in their categories that they became virtually synonymous with the product itself. But what if you're not first? What if you're entering a market where strong positions are already established? Ries and Trout don't leave us hanging. They offer several strategies for those who aren't first. One approach is to find an open position, or what the authors call a créneau, the French word for a niche or gap. This involves looking for aspects of your product or service that aren't being emphasized by the competition and making that your focus. Take 7-Up, for example. When faced with the dominance of cola drinks like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, 7-Up didn't try to out-cola the colas. Instead, they positioned themselves as the un-cola, creating a new category in the mind of the consumer. This clever positioning allowed 7-Up to carve out a significant market share in a field dominated by cola drinks. Another strategy is to reposition the competition. This involves changing the way consumers think about your competitors, thereby creating space for your own brand. We'll dive deeper into this strategy later in the episode. The key takeaway here is that being first in the mind is incredibly powerful. If you can't be first in a broad category, look for ways to be first in a narrower category, or to create a new category altogether. Now, let's explore some specific positioning strategies that can help you find your unique place in the consumer's mind. One approach is the high price strategy. This involves positioning your product as the premium option in your category. A classic example of this is Michelob in the beer market. When Anheuser-Busch introduced Michelob, they positioned it as a premium-priced domestic beer with the slogan, "Where you're going, it's Michelob." This strategy allowed them to capture a significant market share and command higher prices. On the flip side, there's the low-price strategy. This can be particularly effective for new products that customers might be hesitant to try. By offering a lower price point, you reduce the perceived risk for the consumer. However, it's important to note that this strategy can be challenging to maintain long-term, as it often leads to slim profit margins. Age-based positioning can also be effective. Geritol, for instance, successfully targeted older consumers with their tonic, while Aim toothpaste carved out a niche by focusing on children. Gender-based positioning has also proven successful for many brands. Consider how Marlboro transformed itself from a women's cigarette to the epitome of rugged masculinity, or how Virginia Slims carved out a distinctly feminine position in the cigarette market. Another interesting approach is positioning based on time of day. NyQuil, for example, successfully positioned itself as the nighttime cold remedy, differentiating itself from daytime medicines. The key to finding your position is to identify an aspect of your product or service that isn't being emphasized by your competitors, but that resonates with your target audience. It's about finding that unique angle that sets you apart in the consumer's mind. However, while finding a unique position is crucial, Ries and Trout warn against falling into what they call the everybody trap. This is the temptation to try to appeal to everyone, to be all things to all people. The authors argue that this approach typically leads to a weak position that doesn't resonate strongly with anyone. Remember, positioning is about focus. It's about choosing what you want to be known for and committing to that position. This often means sacrificing some potential customers to build a stronger connection with your core audience. Now, let's talk about a common pitfall in positioning: line extension. This is when a company takes the name of a well-established product and applies it to a new product in a different category. While this might seem like a way to leverage the strength of an existing brand, Ries and Trout argue that it often leads to a dilution of the brand's position in the mind of the consumer. Let's look at some examples to illustrate this point. Consider the case of Lifesavers candy. Lifesavers had a strong position in the mind of consumers as the candy with the hole, but when they tried to extend this brand to fruit-flavored gum, it didn't work. The new product confused consumers and didn't achieve significant market share. Or take the case of Bayer aspirin. Bayer had a very strong position as the original aspirin brand, but when they introduced Bayer non-aspirin pain reliever, it undermined their core position. If Bayer is aspirin, how can it also be non-aspirin? The danger of line extension is that it can blur the sharp focus of the brand in the consumer's mind. When a brand tries to stand for too many things, it often ends up standing for nothing at all. However, the authors do acknowledge that there are times when line extension can work. They suggest that it's most likely to be successful when 1. The new product is in a very closely related category. 2. The brand's core position can be maintained across both products. 3. The market is not crowded with established competitors. Even in these cases, they advise caution and careful consideration of the potential impact on the brand's core position. As an alternative to line extension, Ries and Trout suggest introducing new brands for new products. This allows each brand to establish its own clear position in the mind of the consumer. Procter & Gamble is famous for this approach, with separate brands like Tide, Crest, and Pampers, each occupying distinct positions in their respective categories. The key lesson here is to be very cautious about line extension. While it might seem like an easy way to leverage an existing brand, it often comes at the cost of weakening the brand's core position. It's usually better to create a new brand with a clear, focused position than to blur the position of an existing brand. Now, let's turn our attention to one of the most crucial aspects of positioning: naming. Ries and Trout argue that the name is the hook that hangs the brand on the product ladder in the prospect's mind. In the positioning era, they claim, the single most important marketing decision you can make is what to name the product. The authors provide several criteria for effective product names. 1. The name should be short and simple. Long, complicated names are harder for consumers to remember and less likely to stick in their minds. 2. The name should relate to the position you're trying to establish. Ideally, the name itself should begin to tell the consumer what the product is or does. 3. The name should be unique within its category. This helps to differentiate the product from competitors. 4. If possible, the name should have some mnemonic quality that makes it easier to remember. This could be alliteration, rhyme, or some other linguistic device. Let's look at some examples of effective naming decisions. Head & Shoulders shampoo is a great example. The name immediately tells you what the product does. It treats dandruff on your head and shoulders. It's short, memorable, and directly related to the product's position. Another good example is Die Hard batteries. The name instantly communicates the product's key benefit. It lasts a long time. It's short, punchy, and memorable. On the flip side, let's consider some less effective naming decisions. The authors critique names like XD12 or other alphanumeric combinations. These might mean something to the engineers who designed the product, but they communicate nothing to the consumer and are hard to remember. The authors also warn against names that are too generic or descriptive, as these can be difficult to trademark and protect. However, they argue that it's worth taking some risks to get close to the generic, as these names often communicate the product's position most effectively. One interesting point the authors make is about negative names. They argue that sometimes a name that seems negative can actually be positive if it clearly communicates the product's position. They give the example of soy milk, suggesting that soy butter might have been a better name for margarine, as it clearly communicates what the product is and allows for pride of origin. The key takeaway here is that the name of your product or brand is not just a label. It's a crucial part of your positioning strategy. It should be chosen carefully to reinforce the position you want to occupy in the consumer's mind. Now, let's explore one of the most intriguing strategies in the positioning toolbox: repositioning the competition. This approach is particularly useful when you can't find an open position in the consumer's mind to occupy. Repositioning involves changing the way consumers perceive your competitors, thereby creating space for your own brand. It's not about changing your product, but about changing the way people think about the competing product. One of the most famous examples of successful repositioning is the case of Tylenol versus aspirin. For years, aspirin had been the go-to pain reliever for most people. Tylenol, as a newcomer, faced a significant challenge in breaking into this market. Their solution was brilliant. Instead of trying to convince people that Tylenol was better than aspirin, a difficult task given aspirin's entrenched position, they focused on a weakness of aspirin, its potential side effects for certain people. Tylenol's ads said things like, "For the millions who should not take aspirin, Tylenol." They went on to explain that aspirin can irritate the stomach lining and cause other issues for some people. This strategy didn't try to say Tylenol was better for everyone, just that it was better for a specific group of people who shouldn't take aspirin. This repositioning was incredibly effective. It created doubt about aspirin in the minds of consumers and carved out a clear position for Tylenol as a safer alternative for certain people. As a result, Tylenol's market share grew dramatically. Another great example is how Stolichnaya vodka repositioned American vodkas. Their ads pointed out that many American vodkas with Russian-sounding names were actually made in the U.S. Samovar, made in Shenley, Pennsylvania; Smirnoff, made in Hartford, Connecticut. This repositioned these brands as inauthentic, while positioning Stolichnaya as the real Russian vodka. It's important to note that repositioning isn't about making false claims about your competitors. It's about highlighting true facts that change the way consumers perceive the competitive landscape. This strategy requires a deep understanding of your competitors and the perceptions that exist in the consumer's mind. However, Ries and Trout do acknowledge that repositioning can raise ethical questions. They argue that as long as the claims made are truthful, repositioning is a valid and powerful marketing strategy. They compare it to the adversarial system in law, where each side presents its strongest case, trusting that the truth will emerge from this contest of ideas. The key to successful repositioning is to find a weakness in your competitor's position that you can exploit. This weakness should be something that's true and relevant to consumers, and importantly, something that creates space for your own brand's position. As we wrap up our exploration of positioning, the battle for your mind, let's recap some of the key principles we've discussed. 1. In our overcommunicated society, the mind is the battlefield. Effective positioning is about finding a way into the mind of the consumer and staying there. 2. It's better to be first than it is to be better. The first brand to establish a position in the mind of the consumer often maintains a long-term advantage. 3. If you can't be first in a broad category, look for ways to be first in a narrower category or to create a new category altogether. 4. Positioning is about focus. Choose what you want to be known for and commit to that position, even if it means sacrificing some potential customers. 5. Be cautious about line extension. It often leads to a dilution of your brand's position. 6. The name of your product or brand is crucial. It should reinforce the position you want to occupy in the consumer's mind. 7. Repositioning competitors can be a powerful strategy when you can't find an open position to occupy. These principles have the power to transform the way you think about marketing and branding. Whether you're launching a new product, trying to revitalize an existing brand, or looking to advance your own career, the concepts of positioning can help you cut through the noise and establish a strong, memorable presence in the minds of your target audience. As you go about your day, I encourage you to start examining the positioning of the brands you encounter. What position do they occupy in your mind? How did they establish that position? And most importantly, how can you apply these principles to your own brand, product, or career? Remember, in the battle for the mind, the spoils go to those who understand and apply the principles of positioning. So, arm yourself with this knowledge and go forth to win your own battles in the marketplace of ideas. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of positioning, the battle for your mind. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with others who might benefit. And don't forget to check out the full transcript and accompanying visualizations at ceoslibrary.com. Until next time, keep positioning yourself for success.